There must be some kind of magic in the water at NRG Stadium because for the second consecutive NCAA basketball game there, we ended a game with a buzzer beater.
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up? Welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, the only daily national college hoop show out there. This is my guy, Andy Patton. I am Isaac Shade. We're your hosts, and we are so glad to be with you. Although it's bittersweet because, Andy, there is only one more game left on the college basketball calendar, at least on the men's side. How about Caitlin Clark on?
Yeah. Right.
She's so insane. Anyway, that's not what we're here to talk about today, although we should at some point very soon now. But we are here to talk about the two Final Four games from Saturday night. One an epic, one an epic team with a less epic end. And to that point, we want to talk about that epic UConn Huskies team. We'll do all of that in just a little bit, but we start with the first semifinal where San Diego State, on a buzzer beater that I didn't think was going to be able to happen, knocks off Florida Atlantic 72-71 in a game that, quite frankly, Andy, Florida Atlantic controlled throughout, never trailed in the second half until after the final buzzer sounded. I mean, that is the agony of the NCAA tournament. I had a tweet all dialed up, Andy, ready to say, for the first time in NCAA tournament history, we have a team seeded 9th or worse in the national championship game. And as I'm ready to hit send, I instead have to click delete. What happened that got me to that point?
The Butler did it, right? Lamont Butler. What an incredible shot from him. I mean, San Diego State, a team that has been counted out so many times that people, and again, I've said this on the show, that people didn't think they would even win their first game necessarily against Charleston. And not only did they win that, they advanced, they get a chance to play Alabama. Nobody expected them to win that game. They beat Alabama. And honestly, nobody really expected them to beat Creighton either, even though Creighton was the 6th seed. San Diego State was the 5 seed. San Diego State had just beat Alabama. There was still a lot of momentum for Creighton, and they played very well throughout the tournament. And yet here we are. San Diego State is still here. They advance all the way into this position. Lamont Butler does it on a mid-range shot, which is kind of
the least efficient shot in that.
Well, it's been a big staple of San Diego State's, and I definitely saw people take that analytics, which we have an entire offseason, Isaac, to get into the fact that people have boiled down basketball analytics to mid-range equals bad, which is not what analytics are really about. And that's a conversation for another time. This was a phenomenal shot from Lamont Butler. It didn't look like they were going to get it off. I'm with you 100%. I was like, they're just gonna drive down the floor.
He was stuck in that corner.
Yeah, they're not going to get a look. They're not even going to get a shot. He cleared space. I mean, it was beautiful.
It was a great
space. He got himself a look. He pulled up. He let go of it just in time. Nothing but net. It was a perfect shot. And it was one of those that I don't think that luck factor necessarily matters. My 37-foot bank shot is awesome, like Jalen Suggs did a few years ago. And I don't know that he's never going to tell you it was lucky. And I don't think a lot of people are going to say it was lucky. But this shot was just pretty. Like it was well designed, and it wasn't a design play. Brian Dutcher basically said after the game or afterwards, like, we're out of timeout. So like, you just get the ball and go.
They had one.
Oh, they did have one. Excuse me. They did have a timeout. They just chose not to use it. They planned this.
He said he was out of plays, not timeout.
Which is funnier. That's just funnier. It was an incredible shot for the Aztecs. What a story for this team. You know, I mean, we've talked about it a bunch in the last couple of weeks, of course, but, you know, for a Mountain West conference that has had virtually no success in the NCAA tournament, it's kind of been a laughing stock for them to be the first team to advance to the Elite Eight and then the Final Four, and now have a real chance. And they got a tough game coming up, and we're going to get to that. But for them to even be in this conversation for a potential national championship is an incredible testament to the job that Brian Dutcher has done and the heart and tenacity of this team on the basketball court.
And it's nuts because we had talked about this was there were no buzzer beaters in this NCAA tournament thus far. We had a lot of close, like near end of game shots or free throws, even going back to last weekend. But this was the first true buzzer beater of the entire tournament. And every sports information gathering research group posted after the game that this was the first ever buzzer beater in a Final Four Final Four national championship, the final weekend, where the team made a shot while they were trailing. And so that to me, and we're going to have this discussion at some point, Andy, is this the most epic buzzer beater in Final Four history? I mean, I think I don't even want to begin to litigate it now, because I've spent zero time. It's like Jenkins' shot itself was more baller, but when you're down, that's just something different there. And so, Andy, I do want to talk. I know we haven't talked much about the game itself, but what a special run for Florida Atlantic. You have to feel so badly for them. As I said, they controlled the game, but at least the first half they controlled it, and that's the problem, is you have to control for an entire 40 minutes, and they didn't. They kind of kept leaving the door open for San Diego State, who kept leaving the door open themselves at the free throw line, but they left it cracked just wide enough for the Aztecs to waltz through, and that's why we have what we have. But the good news for Florida Atlantic, Dusty May has already committed to a long-term extension. The vast majority of this Owls roster can hang around for next year. We'll see if that happens or not.
Yeah. I think the thing with Florida Atlantic is, like, these teams often kind of I don't want to say they get forgotten, because we've been talking about the 2011 VCU team. We've been talking about the 2006 George Mason team. Obviously, there's a connection there with Jim Larinaga, but like, when they don't advance to the championship, it kind of, like, we've talked so much about how great these runs are to get to the Final Four. And it would have been great to see a team finally break through that.
Yep, like, because none of them have. Right.
Yeah, the last team to do it that was a lower seed at Butler is the biggest one, and they were an 8 seed. We've never seen a lower seed, a bottom half seed, 9 or below, make the championship. Florida Atlantic, no team has ever had a better chance to do it. I mean, it was so close. How Lamont Butler's, if you're not watching on YouTube, I'm holding my fingers very close together. That's how far Lamont Butler was from being out of bounds when he got trapped.
Yes.
If he had been out of bounds, we're having a very different conversation right now. We're talking about a Dusty Mays team, Florida Atlantic, advancing to the championship, and what would be an extraordinary story, not to discredit the story that it is regarding San Diego State, because it still is an incredible story, and it still is a mid-major program. But Heartbreak City in Boca Raton right now.
I thought about it when I first saw that replay of how close he was to being out of bounds. What would have been even worse is if he had actually gone out of bounds, but they missed it and never went back to review it, because they just miss. Sometimes you can't go back to review it if you don't know it, man, like that.
I'm glad it wasn't. Yeah, I'm glad it was the correct call.
Yes, exactly. And for the majority of the game, Andy, it seemed like the storyline was, hey, the fourth most efficient defense in the country did not play like it. I mean, at halftime, I was firing off all these things of like, hey, this is just the third game all season San Diego State has allowed 40 or more points in the first half. And there was just all these things. They Florida Atlantic quickly blew by the most points that San Diego State had allowed in an NCAA tournament game this year. But then they just really put the clamps on them down the stretch there. And Florida Atlantic, just outside of a few things from Elijah, just didn't have the answers offensively.
Yeah, it was a really nice performance from San Diego State, in particular, to shut down John L. Davis, who's been one of Florida Atlantic's best players, if not their best player throughout the tournament. Davis finished this game with 8 points on 2 of 9 shooting. Like, he did not have it. And you mentioned Elijah Martin. He was awesome in this game. He had 26 points, a game high 26 for him, but he was kind of it for the Owls. They just didn't have anybody else. Boyd had 12. He's the only other player in double figures. In fact, this game only had 4 total players in double figures, led by Matt Bradley. And I think we kind of got to end here talking about Matt Bradley, a guy who was getting a lot of criticism. Criticism is maybe not the right word, because this team kept winning, but there was a lot of attention being paid to the fact that Matt Bradley was not scoring. He was not their leading scorer in the tournament. Darion Trammell was doing a lot of the work for him. And then in this game, he comes alive. 5 of 12 from the field is not elite, but he was 4 of 8 from deep. 7 of 9 from the free throw line. He had a team high 21 points. He had 6 rebounds. He had a pair of assists. He only had 1 turnover. Just a masterful performance. And I think, we talk about experienced guard play every single show for the last month. And Matt Bradley, as a guy who spent multiple years at a Power 5 program at Cal, has now spent multiple years at San Diego State. He kind of embodies that more than anybody else. He is a veteran, experienced guy. And even though he didn't have a lot of great performances into this tournament up to this point, when they needed him, he stepped up in a real significant way. Well, Isaac, there was a lot less drama in the second game here of Saturday evening between the Huskies and the Canes. UConn advances to the national championship with another double-digit victory, which puts them in really, really, really rare air amongst the sport's most elite programs. We're going to talk more about that after a word from today's sponsor, Built Bar. The Built Bar March Madness bracket is here, and we know you have a favorite bar or puff, and now is your time to go make it count. Go to BuiltMarchMadness.com to vote for your favorites. You know I'll be voting for the churro bar, and if you want to use your favorite, if you want your favorite team to win, then you'll be voting for that bar too. Support your team, support your bar or puff. And when you vote for your favorite bar or puff, you'll be entered into a drawing where 50 lucky Locked On listeners will get a free box of Built. Not only that, but one Locked On fan will win a free 12-month subscription to Built to have Built's best bars or puffs delivered monthly straight to your door. You got to try Built. It is the best protein bar ever. Seriously. They are so amazing, and you will not think they're good for you. What makes them so good? Well, for starters, they are high in protein, they are low in sugar, and they are covered in 100% real chocolate. That's right, real chocolate. So run to BuiltMarchMadness.com right now to vote for your favorite bar or puff and pick up a box while you're there. Built Bar, a proud sponsor of the Locked On Network. All right, Isaac, we had the game winner, the buzzer beater, the epic madness of March, although it was April 1st on that game on Saturday, but we hoped we would follow it up with something a little bit more exciting, and it wasn't a bad game. Miami definitely hung around quite a bit in the second half. They made things a little bit more interesting than many of UConn's other opponents have done in the second half throughout this tournament. Gonzaga never really made it interesting. St. Mary's wasn't able to make it interesting. Arkansas didn't make it interesting kind of the entire game. Miami, we knew they would hang around. Jim Larinaga has put on a masterful clinic of coaching throughout this tournament. They have made second half adjustments. They have found ways to crawl back into and eventually win every game they played up to this one. But the story is the same story that it has been throughout the NCAA tournament. UConn's front court, specifically Adama, Sanogo, and Donovan Clingan, are just too dang dominant. Is that what you saw in this game?
It absolutely is. Coming into it, Andy, I mean, we talked like how many different times this weekend. Miami versus UConn is a game of Miami's backcourt versus UConn's front court, and whichever of those is the position groups, if you'll allow me a football term, to win out is the team that is moving on to Monday's national championship game. And before I even say the UConn front court of it all, here's all you need to do. You look at the Miami starters, and I'll include even even Norchad Omier, and his front court thing. Not a single Miami starter shot over 50% from the field in this game. And I mean, that tells you all you need to know. So, and probably the enduring image that tells us all we need to know about that is, and we'll talk more about this, but is Nigel Pack breaking his shoe. What up? Shouts to Zion Williamson, and them not having more shoes for him. So, I mean, but yeah. It is UConn and their front court who won it out. Like Donovan Clingan's stat line wasn't all that eye-popping, efficient, but of course it's Sanogo with his double-double. And, you want to talk about efficiency? Homie is 9 of 11 from the field, 1 of 4 from the free throw line, 10 rebounds, 1 assist, 2 blocks. And, by the way, Andy, 2 of 3 from 3, both of which happened in the first couple minutes of the game as UConn raced out to a 9-0 lead. And so if we're answering the question that we asked all week, who wins the UConn front court or the Miami backcourt, pretty obvious answer in this one.
Yeah, 100%. Sanogo was an absolute machine in this game. He has those 2 threes early, which really just was so backbreaking for Miami. And again, credit to Larinaga and the staff, because I think a lot of people thought that this game was maybe not over, but
I said it.
I mean, a lot of people.
Question left is the margin of victory, right?
Right. A lot of people said that, and it didn't take long for Miami to tie that game in the first half. Like, they came back and they made it an interesting game, and then again, credit back to Danny Hurley and their staff, because they took a punch from Miami that they weren't necessarily expecting, because they ran out to a huge lead, looked like they were kind of coasting. Miami punches back, and then UConn they didn't even let it phase them. Andre Jackson was in foul trouble. The Miami was kind of rolling, playing some good basketball, and it just didn't matter. It just did not matter. The Huskies continued to find ways to get open shots. That play they ran at the end of the first half in order to get Alex Caravan an open 3. I mean, that was beautiful. And I believe, Isaac, that UConn had 3 first half buzzer beaters in this NCAA tournament,
Really?
which is insane. How do you do that 3 times in an NCAA tournament
in
where
5
you
games?
have the final possession and you go get yourself an open look? Just back-breaking types of stuff, and maybe we'll have some longer conversation down the line about the kind of sports psychology of that, because I suspect if you get a bucket scored on you at the buzzer, even if it's only halftime, that it's a little demoralizing going into that halftime. And we know, Isaac, we know what UConn has done at the start of the second half in every single game in this NCAA tournament. I mean, they are just obliterating people in that first 4-minute stretch, and they did it in this game against Miami. And again, Miami kind of crawled back a little bit there in the second half, but they shot less than 33% from the field in this one. Struggled just about everywhere. About the only place they didn't struggle was at the free throw line. They went 12 to 12 there, but they shot 35% from deep, which isn't bad. But at the end of the day, UConn was just the bigger team, the more physical team. They had more rebounds. And you mentioned Clingan's stat line, and yeah, it wasn't significant, but he impacted so many shots down low. He used his size, his mobility to play a really, really significant role for this team. And when they're playing like this, man, oh man, do they seem like they're impossible to beat. And this was the closest game they played.
Congrats, Miami.
Closest game they played in the NCAA tournament. It was a 13-point victory. Closest game they have played. That is insane.
Yeah, and that's the hilarious thing, is it's like you want to congratulate Miami because you held UConn to only 13 points away from you, which no one else has done, right? And so, I mean, still wild and insane that, and you know, again, also credit to Miami for getting it to within that. What did they get it down to? 10, 9? Yeah. Was that the smallest?
I think they got it to 8. I think they did get it to 8 in the second half at one point, yeah.
And from down from 20, where it was, I mean, because at that point I was like, man, this is gonna be another 20, 25 point margin for UConn. And they probably could have if they wanted to, but there's just something like when a team, you used this phrase last week, is literally fighting for its life. Yeah. And because that Miami run in the second half came right after Jim Larrañaga had called a timeout, huddled his team, and basically yelled at them, which is not his typical MO or anything of that nature. But I think UConn's ability to not only survive that, but then push it back out just continues to show what Danny Hurley's team is capable of. Andy, like the shoe.
We got to talk about the shoe.
We got to talk about the shoe. Like, how does the man, Nigel Pack, who had the most famous offseason NIL stuff, how on earth does Miami allow it to be him that has no backup shoes? So now not only does he need a Life Wallet NIL deal, he needs some kind of like backup shoe club NIL deal or something. Like what on earth? And this poor manager running back, right? Like, come on.
Just a humorous story, and of course it happened to Pack. Like it made it so that the jokes on social media were more pronounced. So you can give him $80,000 for Life Wallet, but you can't get him a second pair of shoes. And like that's obviously not like they're not super comparable and not super realistic. But it's funny, and I feel bad for Pack to an extent. I don't know exactly whose fault this situation was. And ultimately, I don't know how meaningful it was. Yes, he missed some time on the floor that may have helped Miami stave off what ended up happening, but I don't know that it was the outcome in the game. I did enjoy watching the team manager, student manager, whomever, whatever role that person had, running back and forth to try to get him shoes. Just kind of felt for the whole situation. But you know what? It's one of those things. It wasn't even March anymore. Maybe that was kind of our April Fool's Day sort of like that. We get that for April Fool's Day. Florida Atlantic probably hates April Fool's Day now because the way they got fooled was getting a game winner hit on them. Whereas the Miami UConn one is a little bit more lighthearted, a little bit fluffier for what they had to endure.
Another great run for Miami, to put a capsule on their season, which we'll obviously talk about more in depth, but in a season where everyone once again expected it to be North Carolina and Duke and Virginia coming out of the ACC, it's Miami. That's the team that gets to the Final Four out of that bunch, and obviously following up on last season's Elite Eight. And so really big congrats to them. We'll see who comes back, who's gone and all that, but great stuff. But it's UConn that is this buzzsaw moving on. And to that point, Andy, in a season where we've been so constantly asked, Is there a great team? Is there an elite team in college basketball? And so many people have said no. It turns out there was one all along. We'll talk about that and their conference in just a second. Andy, it has been a tale of 3 seasons. I've said that a couple times lately for UConn, who raced out to a 14-0 start to this season. The first 13 of those of which were all by double digits. Then they hit that skid where they went 2-6, or it almost sounds worse if you say they lost 6 of 8.
Yeah.
Since that time, the last of those was on my birthday, by the way. So I like to think of myself as the demarcation line in their season. Since then, and including this win over Miami, they are 14-2 since that stretch where they went 2-6. We talked a good bit about that. UConn seems to have really come out of that stretch and found their way to it. And so when we look at this UConn team, I think a lot of people were, I don't know if I'd say fooled since we're recording this on April Fool's Day or whatever it would be, but that 2-6 stretch is just something you endure in the middle of a season and keep going. But if you can look at what they did before and after that, this is a truly great basketball team.
Elite. And it's been interesting to see that kind of discourse around like who are the great teams in college basketball, and UConn will forever be labeled as a 4 seed that won the national championship. And there will always be a subset of college basketball fans, whether they are more diehard or even more casual, who will see a 4 seed winning a championship and not necessarily assume that team was the best or one of the best teams in college basketball. And that's just wrong. I mean, it's just wrong. I mean, and again, we'll preview the game. I don't want to presume that UConn is going to win. They will have their hands full with San Diego State. And if they lose that game, certainly the conversation will change.
That's right.
It's a very, very different conversation about, I don't know that we're going to start talking about how great the entire Mountain West is necessarily, but we'll have a different conversation if San Diego State wins that game. But UConn, I mean, the only teams they lost to were Big East teams. And we're going to kind of get to that to close out the show, because I think that's very significant that they did not lose to anybody. And their non-conference schedule was good. I mean, they played Alabama in the non-conference, the presumed favorite to win this championship, the number 1 overall seed. They played Alabama and they beat them. They played Iowa State, who was a solid 6 seed. They beat them. They played Oklahoma State, Oregon, and Florida, all teams that were, that are Power 5 programs that were on various levels of being on the bubble throughout the season. And then, obviously in the tournament, Iona, St. Mary's, Arkansas, Gonzaga, Miami. That's a fantastic, elite group of programs. So they blew through them. They blew through a lot of good teams in the non-conference. They won most of their games in the Big East, and they lost to Xavier twice. Very, very good program. Marquette twice. Providence, Creighton, tournament teams. Seton Hall and St. John's were the losses that are the more baffling ones. But what we're gonna talk about UConn not being in a dominant program because they lost in January to St. John's. Like, it just doesn't impact me that much. It doesn't matter. I mean, this is the number 1 team at KenPom. One of the top offenses in the country, one of the top defenses in the country. They're balanced. They're talented top to bottom. They have an elite front court. Their backcourt is not always fantastic, and that's kind of been part of the rub for them. But looking at what this team has done, 24 of their 30 victories have been by double digits. The lowest margin of victory they have had is 6. Every single non-Big East victory, every single game they won that was not in the Big East was by 10 or more points. This team has dominated from the start of the season to the end of the season with a small 2 to 3 week blip in January. And other than that, they have been, it's hard to argue, the best team in college basketball, and they're playing for it right now. And they have a very, very good chance on Monday of being the team holding the championship at the end. And for anybody who wants to discount that this maybe isn't as impressive of a championship as some of the other ones in the past, I disagree.
That's so strongly worded, Andy. I disagree firmly with your assessment, sir. No, I mean, everything you just said there, when you think about those margins of victory, it's just mind-boggling, right? Yeah. And even in the lot, like they have 8 losses, but the last 4 of them, 1 point at Seton Hall, 3 points to Xavier, 3 points at Creighton, 2 points to Marquette in the Big East. I mean, it's just their biggest margin of loss is 12 at Providence. So, I mean, it's just,
and that's a tough place to play. Yeah. At Providence is hard.
What they've done is just really, really impressive. And so we go beyond talking about just that UConn of it all to the Big East itself, where we ended up talking about the Big East a good amount this year, Andy. And on multiple occasions, we had people reach out and say, feels like you guys are maybe talking about the Big East a little bit too much.
Yeah.
And we heard that and we accepted it, but we also always gently but firmly pushed back and said, no, this Big East is legit and they deserve every amount, if not more, of what we're talking about with them. Turns out we might not have been talking about them enough. I mean, where things stand right now, we've got UConn only like Ken Palm wise, only team in the nation, top 10 in both defensive and offensive efficiency, 3rd and 8th, and that's following their win on Saturday night. And as for the rest of the conference, we've got 3 other teams in the top 15: Marquette 10, Xavier 12, and Creighton 15. And it's funny because perhaps some of the thought about like, oh, the Big East is down is specifically because Villanova was down, and they've been the face of this conference for many years now. And I wonder, I haven't spent too much time thinking about this yet, but because Villanova was not what Villanova has been, was the Big East underrated? I think there's something to that until you start looking at everyone beyond them and what they did. And this conference, man, it's been something all year long.
Absolutely. And I mean, Nova's being down. Georgetown hasn't been good for a couple of years. And those are kind of the pillars of the Big East. Like those are the 2 schools. I mean, at least for me, those are schools that I think about: Georgetown, Villanova. St. John's is probably one of the top ones that kind of comes to mind when you think about like the old Big East and their success in the 80s. And of course, UConn in that conversation as well. They have kind of pinballed in and out of the Big East over the last decade or so. But the programs that get the most kind of associated with the Big East were not very good last year. Villanova was not as bad as it seemed, but they struggled really badly out of the gate, and they kind of never really got any national relevance after that, even though they kind of finished the season looking okay. But St. John's was bad. Georgetown was horrendous. Those things are going to change. And I think that's what's kind of and this is a much larger conversation for another time, but like the Big East is already probably underrated and underrepresented, and schools like Creighton and Marquette and Xavier had awesome seasons, and Providence was very good. And I don't think any of that's necessarily going to change. We'll see what happens at Providence with Kim English taking over for Ed Cooley. But Ed Cooley going to Georgetown and is just immediately bringing a whole host of extremely talented freshmen and transfer. Like they're going to be good. There's no debate that Georgetown's going to be good. And you can guarantee that Rick Pitino is going to get St. John's back to some national relevance very, very, very soon, as in this upcoming season. So for me, like the Big East probably flew a little bit under the radar more so than they should this year. UConn certainly flew under the radar more than they should. I mean, they were a 4 seed that was one of the most dominant teams in the entire, the most dominant team in the entire season outside of, like we said, that one stretch. But the Big East is not going to be down for much longer. If it's even down now, I don't think it's down now, but with Cooley and with Pitino, I think this is going to be an extremely fun conference of basketball next season and beyond. Isaac, we got one more game. One more game. It is on Monday. It is at 9:20 p.m. Eastern time. It is on CBS. The Huskies, Aztecs, UConn, San Diego State, just like you all drew it up in your brackets, right? Send us a picture if you did, because I would love to see that if that was your bracket. It was not mine. I will admit that quite happily. It was not my bracket there. Right now, as we were recording this, the line is 7.5 for UConn at FanDuel. That is a big line, but UConn has also not played a game even really close to that close throughout the NCAA tournament. We will have a ton of preview, predictions, matchups, everything that you want to know about this college basketball game will be coming your way on Monday morning. So check it out. You can find the show wherever you get podcasts, wherever you're listening right now. You can find us on YouTube as well. Just search Locked On College Basketball. While you're there, go hit that subscribe button. You can, of course, follow us on Twitter. He's Isaac Shade. I'm Andy Patton, CBB. We appreciate every single one of you. We're not going anywhere, so check us out. Even after the season, we will have all sorts of updates on the transfer portal, on everything going on, coaching carousel news, NBA draft updates, all that fantastic stuff coming your way throughout the spring and into the summer. For now, though, Isaac, one more game that we get to talk about. I'm so excited for it. Peace out.